Hello, everybody. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to you, and welcome to another live stream session of Azure Back to School. Today, I have Pamela Paterson with me talking about overcoming barriers and finding success and creating, and in terms of creating requirements and working within the remote world. So look forward to hearing this presentation, and I will turn it over to you, Pamela. But first off, thanks everybody for joining. Thanks to all Pamela and all of our presenters this month. Keep track of the schedule and any of the past presentations that you may have missed on azurebackToschool.github.io. And without any further delay, Pamela, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm going to get my presentation in presentation mode here today. So, creating requirements with stakeholders in a remote world, overcoming barriers, and finding success. This is something that we haven't had to deal with too much until more recently. And many people have been thrown online in these online remote workshops due to the pandemic. And it's kind of stayed with us for the most part. But where did we ever learn how to do it? Because it's not really taught in school. It's not really shown at work. So how do we learn? Today, I'm going to talk about how to create requirements with stakeholders in a remote world. You're going to come away with some solid takeaways that you can take back into your workplace about how to do it. So let's get into it. I have a background in systems engineering, information design, project management, chemistry, and journalism. I've conducted thousands of interviews to get requirements, and many of them online. I wrote 2 international bestsellers, including in business analysis, and I'm currently writing a book about stakeholder interviewing for the International Institute of Business Analysis. IIBA is the largest business analysis professional association in the world, and business analysts are known as the master of requirements. So you're in a good place today. Do you know how many IT projects fail? 70%. This is what Standish Group in Boston found when they studied 20 years worth of projects. 70% failed. Of course, the definition of fail is subjective, but they mean that the projects exceeded scope, timeline, and budget. So this is a big problem, whether you're working remotely or not. And further, 0% of projects fail because of technical skills. And that's from Gartner, the research and consulting firm in the US. So one study found that 70% of the projects fail. Another found that no projects fail because of technical skills. Who among us wants to tell the CEO the project failed again? So why do projects fail? There's all kinds of research about why projects fail. Maybe it's about complexity, decisions, poor decisions, lack of user involvement, maybe governance issues, maybe a lack of executive support. Maybe the project is no longer required. Maybe there's politics involved, perhaps poor requirements, project management issues, scope changes. Size matters. The larger the project, more complex it is. Uncertainty, even unknowns, volatility, and not enough coffee. No, that's not true. I wanted to create a rectangle. But there's a lot of potential issues involved in projects failing. What's the common denominator? It's communication. So I'm not saying that poor communication causes all these projects to fail, but it certainly is a correlation. Communication and people and stakeholders. Isn't it interesting that a KPMG Forbes study showed that executives and senior management value communication in employees they hire pretty much the same level as technology skills, 66 and 67%. Our ability to communicate is the foundation of everything else. So as we move along the SDLC, communication is following us everywhere, kind of hovering above, like it's another kind of system almost, with inputs and outputs and alternate pathways and process and feedback, which we'll get to. Communication is one of those elusive things, though. You don't know that you're doing it the wrong way, not getting requirements the best way, because you don't know what you don't know. So, who teaches us how to get requirements remotely? It's like, go ahead and do it without any guidance, any methodology, any science. So, today I'm going to teach you about the top communication barriers and how to get better requirements remotely. One of the complexities of working with people is that everybody is so different. So we need to find strategies that work with these diverse teams. I mean, there are people who are extroverts and introverts. They have different values. Maybe they're affected by noise, misophonia. Maybe they're introverts, geopolitical issues. Maybe they're visual learners. So they can only absorb information if it's presented visually. Maybe there's geographical issues. There's all kinds of issues with the people that we work with. And what we need to do is think about that diversity. And what we know about communication errors is that they're like interest. They compound. Unchecked communication errors are like bad data. And if bad data continues and it's used in other parts of the project, it can be a disaster and hard to correct. And what's better than correcting a communication mistake? It's not making the error in the first place. Much easier to mitigate than do damage control. We save time, money, improve quality by not making mistakes to begin with. And the same goes for requirements, because requirements are information, are communication, just at a different form. So all IT project managers know that the cheapest and most effective way to fix a poor requirement is in the beginning, when it's being created, and even before that, in elicitation with stakeholders. So these days, we're contending with stakeholders who are multitasking because they have deadlines, multiple priorities. They themselves are stuck in compromising environments where the dog is barking, somebody's in the kitchen turning on the blender. There's more meetings, more call exhaustion, and more noise issues, according to Forbes, than ever before. And in virtual meetings, 80% of people are doing something else. That's from Project Management International. So that's a very, very tough thing for us to deal with, because 80% of the people aren't even listening fully to what you're saying. So how do you conquer that? How do you mitigate that? How do you overcome that? You're going to get some tips today. We can guess when our stakeholders say, "Can you repeat that?" They really mean, "I was texting somebody else and I didn't hear what you were saying." Or if they say, "I didn't quite catch that, there was some noise back here," they really mean, "I was making an espresso." Or, "Can you be a bit more specific? Just clarify for me." They really mean, "I was making dinner and I completely missed all of that." So the problem is then that we have 70% of projects are known to fail, even before remote working became the norm. Communication is the major failure point, and it always has been. And now with all of these remote stakeholders zooming out, 80% are multitasking, we have bigger communication problems than we ever had before in creating requirements. It's important to know that successful communication happens before you get in the room. And the most important part of this pervasive dynamic is not how little control we have with our remote stakeholders, but how much influence we can actually have if we know what to do. So we're going to step into that. Here is a communications model that reflects the system of communication. Communication is a system like any other kind of system with inputs and outputs, alternate pathways, process, feedback. Okay? So on the left, what we have is the sender who creates the message. That's us. So we deliberately decide on word choice, meaning, structure, and so on, depending on our audience. We don't have the same conversation with our grandmother that we do with our friends because we're always thinking about our audience. So the sender deliberately chooses a channel. So face-to-face, phone, email, text, Zoom. It's a deliberate choice. A technique. So whether we're doing interviews, lessons learned, process modeling, workshops, maybe a combination of interviewing in a workshop, and the tool. Excel, PowerPoint, Miro, Visio, Word, DevOps, Jira, whatever it is. Then the receiver interprets the message and tries to figure out what the ask is and then gives feedback. No feedback is also feedback because it means that our process needs to improve. Because if you look at this communication model, we are really responsible and in control of most of the model. Right from the very beginning of creating the message, creating that communication, trying to think about our stakeholder, the receiver, and then sending it out. The receiver is only receiving. And of course, the success of communication is always in the receiving message, the message that we get back from our stakeholders. That's the success of the communication. And if that's not happening right, then we kind of need to do a deep dive, go into the root cause and figure out why. So maybe the way that you have this combination of channel, technique, and tool is not effective for that stakeholder. So you could have the best message created ever, but if you choose this wrong or incorrect combination that's not effective for that stakeholder, then you won't get the proper feedback that you're looking for. And this is compounded by the environment. So noise, geopolitical context, whatever else is going on at home. So you need that alignment between the channel, the technique, and the tool. I'll give you an example. So I've done quite a bit of work for Red Cross, and the doctors are in the field. They are addressing disasters. They are patching people up. They're doing amazing disaster work. They're not very computer literate. So if you had a 1-hour elicitation workshop with them with Miro, for example, a mind map, that would be a big fail because they don't know Miro. And it would be frustrating and you'd be losing time to learn Miro, take away from the focus of what you have them there, which is to get information. But if I was having that same workshop with the IT department, then that would be a good choice. They're used to Miros. They can pick up a tool in a day, 10 minutes, and it would be a good choice. So even in the same organization, you may need to use different tools for different groups. And on one project I worked on, I wasn't getting any feedback from any stakeholder at all about my questions. By email, I wasn't getting any feedback at all. And as it turns out, the project manager was working 16-hour days. And the best channel for her was text. It's not ideal to get requirements by text. It was really an exception kind of situation, but it was the best that she could do. And so we change our communication to fit our stakeholders and what they're dealing with. And maybe you even have a two-step process. Maybe you are getting requirements and documenting them in Microsoft Word and then putting them into a tool like DevOps. Because when you collect information in Word, then you're able to get more information, you're able to write down more, and then take a subset of that and put it into a requirements management tool. It's about what's easiest for your stakeholders to review, to make track changes, to give feedback back to you. And it's interesting that about emails, we've all had emails that go back and forth, maybe 20 times, and then it becomes bold and highlight and caps and still not better communication. And in fact, there was a recent survey about emails and the effectiveness of them. After 3 exchanges in email, it's not going to get any better. And you should choose a different communication method. Switch over to some other channel after 3 times of email. Another technique you can use to get to know your audience better and the kind of communication that you can give is mini stakeholder analysis. And I actually think we all do this innately as human beings. We think about our audience before we speak or act. And maybe you haven't broke it down into a methodology for yourself. So I'm going to present that now. First thing we want to know is, who are they? Are they executives who have 10 minutes for you? So we keep it at the high level. We think very carefully about mincing our words and compressing them to fit into their 10 minutes. And I've maybe even spent an hour preparing for an executive for their 10 minutes. Okay, it's a very deliberate methodology for yourself. Are they frontline workers whose job it is? Well, you can have detailed discussions with them. So who are they? Their level of interest. Do they care about this project? If they don't care, and it's very obvious they don't care, I might find some other stakeholders to invest my time in. What about their level of influence? Are they an executive or a director? Or are they a frontline employee whose job that it is for 20 years and people respect? What is their level of influence? And that'll help you figure out how much time to spend with them and what questions to ask. And are they impacted by the change? Because people who are impacted by the change tend to be more active stakeholders, especially if you make them aware of how they'll be impacted. Attitudes and beliefs. I take note of their attitudes and beliefs and consider it with other elements. And if I need a mitigation later on, but I do observe attitudes and beliefs initially. And what do they want or need? Everybody wants or needs something. Maybe it's time, better processes. Sometimes it's just about being listened to. And if I sense that, then maybe my first session with them is just all about them unloading onto me, maybe about how bad a system is. And that's an effective use of time. What do they want and what do they need? And what do they know or don't know? So if they've never worked on an IT project, they don't know what a proper requirement is, I'm going to spend that amount of time with them and you just ask them. That's how you find this out. You just ask them, have you ever worked on a software project before? Have you ever developed requirements before? And if they haven't, then spend that amount of time teaching them what that is. And you'll save far more time in your sessions because you can have very targeted conversations. Stakeholder information to know. You never want to walk into a room without knowing this information. What is their personality? And you can get this information from anywhere, from the project manager, from the sponsor, other people on your team, other people on their team, okay? So what is their personality like? How do they approach people? What do they like to work with? What are their pros and cons? What is their position on the project? So we're talking about influence and knowledge here. What is their position and team day to day? So they might have a different kind of position on the project that they do day to day. Well, find that out because then you know where they can help you on your project. Know what a requirement is. So we just talked about this. If they don't know what it is, spend some time, maybe even develop a mini presentation, walk through half an hour, so that your conversations don't veer off down into the rabbit hole about what requirements are. Have they worked on previous similar projects? You definitely want to know this information before getting into that room. Are they familiar with this project? Not everybody is. I've been on lots of projects where the stakeholder said, well, what is this about anyway? I don't even know. So find that out and include that as part of your intro script in your session. Backup stakeholder, we want to identify this at the very beginning of the project, even before you started, so that if there's a problem with the primary stakeholder or they go on vacation, you know who your backup is, who you can go to. Authority to make decisions. Some people have a lot of information, but they don't have the authority to make the decision. So when it comes down to prioritizing the requirements or even which requirements to include, they don't have that authority. Impacted by change. If they're impacted by the change, they will participate more, most likely. Attitude about this project, we talked about, and meeting preferences. You wouldn't think that meeting preferences would have such an impact on your requirements and creating requirements. But one subject matter expert I was working with, he was in meetings all day long from 7 in the morning until 4 in the afternoon. And I wasn't getting the kind of participation that I had hoped. And so when I approached him, he said, I'm really sorry, but I'm in meetings all day long. The best time to reach me is by text and email. That's it. So when I started doing that, I started getting that participation that I was looking for. And any conflicts with other departments or others, we don't want to put those people in the same room together because it could be distracting in terms of your goals. And we never put a cat in a room with a mouse. Okay, so mitigation is always our best friend when we are planning our workshops, planning our creating requirements workshops. And when you have this information about your stakeholders, then you can mitigate. And so your workshop will go very, very smoothly. Shrink our digital cling time with others. Now let's take a look at online meetings. We've got the zoomed out stakeholders. They're falling asleep. They're multitasking. They're making breakfast. So what do we do to prepare? One of the things that we can do is to reduce the amount of online time that we need from stakeholders. And I see some companies going in this direction, even shortening a 1-hour meeting down to 50 minutes or 45 minutes is really appreciated by stakeholders. And pretty much all they have for in terms of an eye span anyway. So we want to, how do we do that? How do we reduce the meeting time when we, in the past, have really needed all that time? One of the ways that we can do it is to do our research. So we don't start at 0 in the room. We do as much research as possible. Maybe we get some starter requirements. Maybe we talk to some of the stakeholders individually, get some of their issues on the table, talk to them, get information from them. So when we come into the room, we're able to say to them, okay, so Jack, you've mentioned these requirements. Ali, you've mentioned that we have these kinds of issues to deal with. You don't start at 0. And also you identify risk in the elicitation. So before you get into that room, identify if there's any kind of a risk in elicitation. Are there stakeholders who've never worked on a software project? Are there stakeholders, groups that shouldn't be together, a cat and a mouse in the same room? Okay, so identify what your risks are in elicitation and address them in advance. And also by doing our mini stakeholder analysis. So we really know our stakeholders before we get into that room. Time is the most precious thing you can ever give people on the job, apart from quality. So give them time back and they'll appreciate it and you'll be in their good books. Organization of requirements workshop. There's all kinds of different ways that you can organize the questions in your workshop. And it depends on your goals, the best way to meet them. Okay. So for example, maybe you're going to have your questions, or maybe you're going to organize your workshop from general and then specific. general, high level, overview. This is what the project is about. And then specific requirements. Executive stakeholders first. So if you have some executive stakeholders in the group meeting, their time is the most precious out of everybody's. Maybe have them speak first or get their requirements first so that they can drop off. Free-form stream of consciousness listening. Sometimes people just want to unload. Sometimes the best thing that you can do for them is let them unload their frustrations. And that's your whole meeting is dedicated to that. I have this as part of my planning. So I might have to plan 3 workshops, and knowing the first one, if I know that the stakeholders are quite unhappy or they're very frustrated with the system, then I write this one off as rapport and team building and letting them have that free-form stream of consciousness. By department or functional group, maybe that's how we want to organize the meeting. Easy to contentious. Get that low-hanging fruit, okay? Quick wins, quick success, and then move into the more difficult parts. Maybe that's how you want to organize. Known to unknowns. This is what we know. Current state is what we know. And then future state. That's what we're getting to. Critical, then less important. If you think you might run out of time in the meeting, get the critical stuff out of the way first. Relationship building one first. So maybe you're acknowledging the work that they've done on the project so far. That's a relationship builder. Simple to complex. Well, that makes good sense. Functional, then non-functional. So you get the user stories and requirements from your users, and then you go to the technical team and get the non-functional requirements. Or by project objective, or by module, or by order of what we perceive to be the order of the way the system is being built. There's all kinds of different ways to organize your requirements workshop. Here's the last one. Based on who's in the room and who's on holidays. If you know somebody's on holidays and you know, because you know the stakeholders, you know what their area is, maybe you'll leave that off the agenda completely until they get back. So the more you know about your stakeholders, the better you can organize your workshop to be efficient and get those requirements. And also shrinking the online time from people. And that keeps them more engaged. Okay, getting stakeholders to hustle for you before you get into that room, because we're all focused on what can we do before we get into that room. Try to get as much done as possible before you get into that Zoom room, and get others to do as much as possible. So how do you do this? You send a detailed agenda so they know what they need to talk about. They know what they need to research before they get into your room. And a detailed agenda, it won't say like requirements, SAM. Maybe it says provide requirements for accounting module, SAM. And also putting names beside the agenda items. Okay, putting names directly beside the agenda items that you're sending out in advance, so they won't multitask, at least for that part of the meeting. And that's really what we can expect now, is people are going to multitask. 80% are multitasking. And so we're trying to organize their time and their focus and their attention to get at least part of them in the part that matters. So putting their names beside the agenda items ensures that you're going to get that information from that person. And pinging people ahead of time. Are they ready for this meeting? Is there anything they can send ahead of time? Any starter requirements? Get that engagement before you get into the room. Everyone's rocking their own name tag blinders. It's true that people only see their name. And saying people's names triggers a heightened response in our brains. And this is science. We pay closer attention to the person who says our name. And we all know that people don't like to read anymore. The chances of them reading a 50-page document or even a long email are kind of slim. So if you want somebody to read something, add their name and tell them all you need to do is search for your name. Who doesn't like to search for their own name? You would be surprised how well this works. I'm actually working on a project right now. I did about 350 requirements, and I have in one column, I have the person's name who should review that requirement. And instead of reviewing 300, because they won't review 300 requirements very well, but they will review the ones that have their name beside them. And maybe that's 20 each or 30 each. I'm getting a far better result by targeting their focus. And there are some other advantages. It saves people time, and they know that the other section or action item or piece of information is being handled by somebody else because they can see that communication. Ali, his name is over here. Sarah, her name is over here. Okay, Miriam, assigned to something else. They can see that somebody else is covering it. And this is really a brilliant strategy to get people to review your requirements. And whenever you can save somebody time, you're one step closer to them doing more work for you because they can trust that you're using their time well. Assume that stakeholders are multitasking in your meeting. We have stressed out stakeholders. And they never have enough time. They are multitasking. 80% of them are doing something else. And so we are no longer working with 100% of a person. We're no longer working with a complete person anymore. And our communication style and approach needs to reflect that if we're going to win at this requirements game. The worst thing for you as a presenter is that you ask somebody a question and they say, "Oh, can you repeat that?" Or they say nothing at all, and you have this dead air hanging in your workshop because they're not there. They're doing something else. They're answering an email. It's very distracting for your other participants to have this space hanging in the air for you to repeat the person's name, repeat the question, and you lose momentum in your workshop. It's very distracting. So other people might not even take your workshop seriously anymore if this keeps happening to you, because it kind of reflects on maybe they think your ability as a facilitator, even if that's not a fair characterization. So use mitigation techniques in your workshop. Keep the workshop slow. If somebody's doing multiple things, they need to have the workshop at a slow pace so that they can do two things. Repeat content. Be very repetitive and don't assume 100% comprehension the first time. Let people know the action items in the meeting, at the end of the meeting, and in your post-meeting summary in your email. Okay, so we tell them what we're going to tell them, and then we tell them what we've told them. Stakeholders need this repetition. And I also use stakeholders' names a lot. You know, in person, if we were in person, we would look around, we would catch their eye. We wouldn't even need to say their name, really. But online, I use people's names a lot. Ali, what do you think about that? Or Ali, for this next piece about reporting, so I gave him some runway, right, to get back into my meeting. Ali, for this next piece about reporting, I'm hoping to get your thoughts. Is that okay? And then Ali can stop his multitasking and come back. That is the nature of our meetings now. And it's a very different shift from what we did before. Making modulation your friend. So modulation means controlling or modifying something, the speed, the pace, the volume, production, flow, amount. I've already talked about how workshops need to be slower. Okay. They need to be repetitive. So the flow, the amount, to regulate, adjust, And this is what we continually need to do in our online meetings. We need to learn when to talk, when not to, when to listen, when to allow a space in the air for somebody to fill in. Sometimes that's a very good strategy, silence, because it kind of makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable and they want to fill it with more information, which is great if you're trying to get more requirements. If I'm doing all the talking, then my stakeholders aren't. And they're the ones with the information. I'm meeting to hear from them. So I'm probably, as a facilitator, I'm probably the quietest person in the room. And that's a strategy. So keep the workshop slow, let people talk themselves out. I'm a copious note taker because if I don't use that information for that requirement, I might use it for something else down the line in another deliverable. Always have a backup plan. If your stakeholders aren't talking, then like a process flow, have a main strategy, alternate strategies, exception strategies. So my primary question, as an example, a primary question might be, what is your job day to day? And then if I'm with somebody who just is not a very verbal person, I might have some backup questions planned in advance. So I might say, I read that your job is to do inventory counts. How do you do that? And then if I'm still not getting information, then I'll ask in an alternate way. Suppose I'm a new employee. How would you teach me to do inventory counts? Because you keep finding a different way to work with your stakeholder and their communication style until you find one that fits. So you're always trying to modulate based on the issues that you've seen. If people are not talking enough, have more questions. People not showing up, ask them if this time works for them or they need another channel or somebody else should take their place. So keep monitoring how those issues are going in your workshop so you can do mitigation. Take and show notes to modulate or not. This is another way that you can modulate your meetings. If you take notes in front of your stakeholders or not. So here's what I mean. If you take notes on screen in front of your stakeholders, your objective might be to slow down the meeting so they can see that you haven't caught up. It's an excellent nonverbal strategy. When you've got 10 people in a room, in your Zoom room, they're looking at your notes, they see that you haven't caught up, they will slow down. It's an excellent nonverbal strategy. So another reason you might want to take notes on screen is for them to verify accuracy on the fly. When are we ever going to have 10 sets of eyes on our content at the same time? It's very rare, if ever. And they can verify the accuracy immediately, and this will help you avoid a review cycle. So I am a huge fan of taking notes on the screen. If I want to take notes off the screen, maybe there's a good reason for that too. So it's a deliberate decision. Maybe there is something private that I'm writing down. Maybe I'm an IT auditor. Maybe you're tagging your notes with concerns to follow up or escalate, and you don't want your stakeholders to see that at that moment. Maybe there's another reason. Maybe the stakeholder discussion, I've been actually just recently, I was in this scenario. The stakeholder discussion wasn't giving me very good information in terms of requirements, but it was important for them to build rapport, important for them to talk to each other, to spend time with each other, and get the gel of the team going. So that meeting had an important function, but I wasn't getting requirements, and it wasn't necessary to show my screen because it would have been quite obvious and maybe contributed to some disconnection if I showed my screen that didn't have any notes on it. So taking notes in front of stakeholders on and off screen is a very intentional choice, and it's a strategy. One of the points that is often overlooked is that People have different learning styles. They have different ways of processing information. Some people are all verbal. So no matter what you say, no matter how fast you say, they're going to get it. They're going to remember it. They're going to be able to process it. They're going to be giving you an answer back. You're going to be happy. Some people are visuals. So they need to see something in order to process it, in order to understand it, and in order to give effective feedback. Most people, 65% or so, higher in IT, are visual. About 30% are verbal, and 5% are kinesthetic. So kinesthetic people need movement, like this, for example. They need movement. They need to see movement. They need to do drag and drop. They need highlighting. They need to be actively involved. Okay? And consider this scenario. When you give information verbally, we've all been in meetings that have been all verbal for an hour or 2 hours. Way too long for a meeting. But when you give information verbally for 2 hours without any documents, nothing for them to look at, you're capitalizing only on that verbal learning style for the 30% of people in the room. And maybe even actually less if they don't know your subject matter, it's complex, they're very distracted, they're new to the company, they're new to the project. So it could even be less. How do you feel about reaching only 30% of the stakeholders and probably less? Maybe you've been preparing weeks for this meeting, researching, weeks of time, energy, talking to people, interviewing people, doing all that great research up front. And then in your meeting, less than 30% of people actually can understand, comprehend, process, and give you proper feedback. And the sad part of this for them is that they won't even know that they're not receiving all the information that you're intending because they don't have that capability. I'm actually a very visual person, probably 90% visual. And that's what it's like for me and obviously many, many other people because visual is a prominent learning style. So for some people, it'd be like they barely heard anything at all, even though they're paying attention. That's how important being mindful of learning styles is. Now, if we add some visuals, think about that. We've got the verbal learners here, 30%. We add some visuals to our workshop. Now we have about 95% of your audience's ability to understand what you're saying. Now it's sounding a lot better for your time and success rates in getting the feedback that you want. So if you can optimize the ability of your stakeholders to process information, then you've also optimized the level of success that you can have in getting that information from them. Really, really important. And we can no longer ignore other types of learners who are not like us. Have at least visual and verbal in every workshop that you have to give and get good information. Because the only way that we're ever going to find out that they didn't absorb the information is in the feedback stage, which is far too late. If we go back to feedback stage, it's far too late, and it's at the end of the process. So we want to have that mitigation along with our channel, technique, tool. We want to be visual and verbal in our meetings. Okay, designing your information with intention and audience. This is the last segment of the presentation, and I'm going to talk about designing your information, the importance of it, what is it? You might even be saying, well, what does designing information have to do with requirements and getting good requirements? Information design involves treating information like data and identifying and grouping like information. There is a whole ton of science and university programs around information design and the effectiveness of it in terms of reaching your audience. Companies like Amazon, they're very good in getting you to buy quickly, in shortening the amount of time and increasing the ease at which, from the time that you see a product to your ability to click it, click once, click one click purchase, right? Shortening that time, thus increasing the chances and the likelihood that you'll do it. So information design is about removing those inefficiencies, removing the excess and the poor quality of design of content to facilitate better communication. That's what it's about. And I think unknowingly, I think that you already know these kinds of concepts, because when you tell a story, you're thinking about, well, how do I tell the story? What's the beginning, the middle, and the end? So you are designing information in a way that's going to be palatable and have the maximum uptake by your audience. For other purposes, maybe you're going to talk about something in terms of being simple to complex, or chronologically, or problem then solution, issue then recommendation. We're not going to have the recommendation first and then the issue. So we design information with intention and being mindful of our audience in the best way that the audience, our stakeholders, can consume the information, to decode and understand and give you the feedback in the best way. Let's take a look at some very simple techniques that you can use right away in your workplace. So here's a very simple email. It's simple for the sake of this presentation. Who's bringing the desserts? Subject is meeting. And the email is, hi, looking forward to seeing all of you on Thursday for the knitting club. We really need to get the elections done so we know who is president. Linda, can you bring the ballots? Tarek, see if you can find the privacy booths. And Alex, thanks for bringing the desserts. If you have any questions, let me know. Okay. It's a straightforward, simple email. It's clear. We know who's doing what. But now look at when it's information designed, starting with the subject line. So even before somebody opens up that email, they know what this email is about, because we're inundated with email, 300 emails a day, and it includes the names of the people who are affected, who have an action item. So if our name is here, an email comes to us, it has our name in the subject line, we are more likely to open it up. That's about information design. And then down here, the goal is to organize for elections, and the task is in a structured table. So whenever you can take information and kind of think about, how would this be presented in Excel in a structured kind of a way? How can I turn information and writing into data? You're thinking along the lines of information design. And here we are forced to read the whole thing to find out where our name is. And here we can see in an instant who's doing what and when. It's a very, very simple example of information design. And of course, we are really used to working with much longer documents and maybe some really long emails. And you can think about the applicability of this, going from having this amount of content to this amount of content, how much easier it's going to be for your stakeholders to understand what to do. Designed information can easily save 50% of time in that interaction. I've done many calculations. Other people have done extensive calculations on this. I've seen numbers even as high as 80%. And it also helps mitigate some of the causes of miscommunication to do with information overload, because we're using fewer words. There's less information. Stakeholders can focus on the most important parts. Information design, it reduces the message complexity. It's easier to read and absorb. And so therefore, it also increases the chances that our messages will be read. Because when stakeholders are inundated with information and there's competition for their time and their eyes all the time, You want to cut through that competition. You want your stuff to be the easiest thing to look at all day. Will a stakeholder be more inclined to read an email that has their name in the subject line? Absolutely. It's an easy technique to get ahead of all those other emails. And this is clearly a simple example. I mean, we don't have an entire day. I could give an entire workshop on this topic. But this is clearly a simple example of information design. And when you consider that the average person reads 2 million words a year, 2 million, and maybe a team on a software project is a team of 10 people. So we have 20 million words a year that we're dealing with. This technique, very simple, carries a lot of effectiveness in our day-to-day job. It's not just about the content anymore. It's about how it's designed. So I give you another example about requirements. So this example is not designed, and I'll read it out here. We need this requirement added to the system. The call center agents who answer the phone right now need to see how many calls they have in their queue to answer, but also all the other calls for other agents. We don't want that. We just want them to be able to see their own number of calls waiting. So it's a pretty clear requirement. I mean, there's no grammatical mistakes. It's written in active language. It's a pretty clearly written requirement. But notice what happens when it's designed. So now we've pulled out current state. We've pulled out future state. And we've added change requested. So current state, agents can view number of callers in the queue, both theirs and other agents. Future state, agents can only view their own number of calls in the queue. Change requested is modify the reporting access so that agents can only view their own statistics. And here's something interesting. This change requested is actually not in the original requirement, but we didn't know because everything is all mashed together. So when you pull things apart, it helps ease the readability and the usability of your information. Even this very simple requirement, there's a dramatically different uptake level and understanding level when it's designed. And notice this link between form and function. So in this form, harder to read, right? The functionality, harder to read, harder to do. In this form, it's much easier to understand. And again, if we can optimize our ability to reach stakeholders through these kinds of techniques, then we're also optimizing their ability to give feedback back to us. And our world is so visual now. So here's another example of a status report. And so we have here on the left, subject is project, status report. Hi, below, please find the status report for the week for the process improvement project. This week, we advanced on 3 process maps. So now we have about 50% in phase 1 done. Phase 2 is beginning. And while we are in yellow, we expect to make some gains and aren't concerned about the status. Please let me know if you have any questions. So it's a very clearly written email. There's no issues there. There's no grammar issues. It's easy to understand, but it's not designed. On the right side, in the subject line, we know right away this project is a green status, and we know for which week. So a busy sponsor doesn't even need to open up this email if they have 300 other ones, because they know it's a green status for this week. And that's terrific for a sponsor. When you're able to communicate in the shortest, most effective way possible to them, they appreciate it, they recognize it, and they know it, and they associate that with your brand. So when we go to look at this email redesigned, the most important information is at the top, going to the least important. So overall project status is green, using some nice color there. Risks, none. Detailed status by phase. Phase 1 is green. Phase 2 is yellow. Okay. Somebody almost doesn't even need to read anymore when you design information. This really enhances your brand as a professional, and because there's a predictability and there's reliability and a consistent experience with you. It's much appreciated and contributes to the success on the project and in the company. So, in conclusion, projects fail for many reasons, and the correlating factor is communication issues. Many virtual stakeholder challenges for requirements can be mitigated with strategy. I've given you so many different tips about mitigating communication and stakeholder challenges with strategy. Sometimes we talk, sometimes we don't, sometimes we show our notes, sometimes we don't. We redesign information so it's easier for uptake. There's all kinds of, I hope you get a chance to go through this presentation again and get all those tips. And we can communicate our way to getting better requirements. Please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm happy to answer any questions. I have personally used these techniques on my projects. I'm an IT business analyst for over 50 organizations. I've had over 50 clients that I've worked with. And everywhere I go, I try these techniques out. They work, they're effective. They facilitate communication. They allow stakeholders to have a better experience with us. And I hope you get a chance to use them. Thank you very much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Pamela. Great information. Something I'm going to take into account and use myself. We've got Derek. Derek made it to the stream, so I'm going to let Derek close things out. But thank you again, Pamela, for your presentation. It was amazing.
Thank you very much, Dwayne, for helping out today.
Yeah, no, I'd echo Dwayne's sentiments. That was a fantastic presentation. I know I certainly learned a lot and things that I can apply to my own kind of day-to-day happenings at work from a overall IT perspective. So I can admittedly say I struggle with communication, and that's not always an easy thing to admit, given kind of where most IT people are. We always seem to have this kind of, I don't want to say air of arrogance, but just kind of this like, oh, we can do all of it. We've got the technical know-how, and yeah, we tend to sometimes fall a little flat. But fantastic presentation, Pamela. Thank you so much. I encourage everyone out there, if you didn't catch this live, please go back and rewatch this recording. There's a lot of valuable information. Please reach out to Pamela on her socials, message her for tips, tricks, anything else. I think you guys would glean some absolutely fantastic information from her and her experiences in the IT world. And with that being said, Pamela, thank you again so much. We look forward to hopefully seeing you again next year and contributing more to Azure Back to School.
That sounds great. Thank you very much for inviting me.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you, Pamela. Thanks, everybody.
Take care.